Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the latest trends in enterprise tech? Look no further than the Breaking Analysis podcast with Dave Vellante. This data-driven program dives into the most important topics facing the enterprise tech industry today. With a data-first approach that leverages ETR's renowned surveys of IT decision-makers and insight from the CUBE community, Breaking Analysis delivers in-depth research on the most important topics facing technologists and IT buyers. Whether you're a business leader, an IT professional, investor, or just an avid follower of the industry, this podcast is a must-listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast wherever you get your podcast and tune in today to stay ahead of the game in enterprise tech.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. June is upon us, almost the halfway point of the year. It's amazing how fast 2023 has gone along and gotten away from us. Hope everybody's doing well. Another Sunday Perspective show. And today I'm going to do something that I enjoy doing quite a bit. Hopefully it will be somewhat useful to the audience. We're going to do a little bit of teaching today. I know a lot of times we do these sort of perspectives, historical takes, just opinions on things. Today we're going to do a little bit of teaching for a couple of reasons. One, had somebody who reached out and said, hey, within your regular day job, does anybody ever ask you for an ROI, a return on investment study or report or, whatever they call it, sort of a guide? If somebody is considering buying the product that you have or the technology that you sell or that you work on, do they ever ask you for an ROI, so a return on investment? And to a certain level, most of you have probably heard of this before. And I would also suspect that a number of you have probably never had to go through and build a ROI model or an ROI model. Because if you do it in sort of the financial world, so let's suppose you are buying a stock or a bond or you're making a financial investment, doing an ROI calculation is fairly straightforward because, and we'll kind of get into it after the break, but you have a finite amount of money you put in, say $100, and at some point in time, you're either going to, assuming you put it into something that you can get the money back out of, not like gambling on a you're in Las Vegas or something, but you buy a stock or you buy a bond, or let's say you buy an automobile or something. At some point, you can either sell it or make some money on it, and then you can do a fairly straightforward ROI calculation. And I put some links in the show notes for how to go about doing that in the most basic way. Now, the challenge with technology ROIs is a number of things that, again, we'll get into after the break. Everything from oftentimes you don't necessarily know the easiest way to calculate if you're going to make more money because of this technology investment. Maybe that's not necessarily even your job to think about how you're going to make more money. The second part has to do with the time of it. Like how long do you measure a technology investment? Because you're probably not going to sell the software back to somebody else. And the third is, how long does somebody actually stay in a job as to whether or not the boss who asked for that ROI study in order to make a decision, are they even around to measure it the next year or 3 years or 5 years from now? So, but the reason I bring this up, and I think it's probably somewhat useful and valuable and interesting, is that obviously, we've been talking about this entire year, it feels like. Financially, everything's a little bit different this year. Interest rates are no longer near zero. Money is no longer basically free. And so every company, whether you are selling technology or you are consuming technology, from the cloud or software or whatever, is having to go through a new form of kind of budget justification, budget rationalization, trying to prioritize which project to work on, which one gives you the best return is the most important. And so I think kind of walking through this, how do I do an ROI exercise? Because you very well may be asked to do one. You may have never been asked to do one in the past. And you might be like, well, why do I need to? How do I do it? What are the benefits of this? Are they real? Are they just made up? All that sort of stuff. So we're going to dig into that right after the break. Is your cloud bill out of control? CloudZero is building a platform that will let you analyze your cloud investment faster than ever before. You'll get accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. CloudZero is how cloud-driven companies gain more financial control and predictability by driving immediate and ongoing savings. You can answer questions like, how can I save 20% on my cloud bill right now? Who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. Again, please visit cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about ROI, or return on investment, calculations, reports, studies, all the ways in which people ask you to basically justify why are you spending money on technology. And again, as I mentioned, for in the financial world, this is a pretty typical thing. So let me kind of give some context before we dive into why doing it for technology is a little bit different and unique and so forth. But let's say you are the CFO of any given company. So you're a large size company and you are being asked on any given day, in any given hour, for money. Somebody in some line of business, some manager, some vice president, somebody is saying, hey, I have an idea, but that idea requires money. And so people are constantly coming to the CFO or, whoever runs the budget, could be a division leader, could be a general manager, whoever. And they're saying, hey, give me money so I can go do this thing that I think is going to be good for the company. And in the most basic way in which those people have to figure things out, there's some frameworks they have in mind, because otherwise you're either just in a situation of saying like yes to everything until all the budget runs out, or you say no to everything and you seem like you're not trying to help grow the business, or you get into this weird, well, what should I say yes to and what should I say no to? And so the typical sort of framework, and this is the thing they'll teach you like in business school, is that the first thing you want to do is you want to build an ROI case study, and you are looking for what they call positive ROI, meaning let's just take the most basic scenario. So somebody comes to you and they say, please give me $10,000. And you say, okay, what are you going to do with that $10,000? Well, we are going to invest it in something and it's going to help us generate new revenue, right? And so you go, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. How much new revenue will it generate, right? And so you would typically go through some sort of calculation that would say, if I put $10,000 in, and let's say, for example, I get $20,000 from that $10,000, you would calculate that and you would say, well, I made $20,000. My cost was $10,000. So I made an additional $10,000 on the $10,000. That is a 100% ROI, right? So you made back all of your money. You made back the additional amount of the money that you made. So you made 100% return on your investment. So the first thing that the person in charge of, I'm just going to keep saying the CFO, but it could be whoever's in charge of the budget. The first thing they're looking for is positive ROI, right? So they're not looking to lose money because, while you might lose money at some point in the stage of doing business, customer acquisition, or growing a sales force, or doing early marketing, in general, you don't want to be in the business of doing all your projects having negative ROI, meaning you spend more money than you eventually bring in. So the first thing they're looking for is, give me a positive ROI. The second thing they're looking for is they're typically looking for a positive ROI within a given period of time, because you can, in almost every scenario, whether you are building a 100,000 seat stadium that might take 5 years to do it and cost $1 billion, or spending $100,000 on Google Ads, at some point you could probably make a case for, well, at some point in the future, in the fullness of time, as Andy Jassy at Amazon likes to say, you could probably make money or make more money back. The problem is that might not be the time frame the CFO is looking for. So typically the first thing looking for is positive ROI, meaning you're going to bring in more money than you spent. The second thing is they're looking for typically some sort of time frame. So are you making this back in a year? Are you making this back in 2 years? Are you making this back in 3 years? And they typically have some guidelines about different types of investment and how quickly you should be getting your return back on that investment, right? So that's the second thing is, does this fit within the window in which they're willing to spend that amount of money or prioritize that amount of money? The third thing they tend to look for, because you could have hundreds of projects that all have positive ROI, and they could all have, all be within the right window. So let's say everything, just for fun, everything in the company has to be positive ROI within 1 year. Great. The next thing they tend to do is they tend to say, well, let's have some sort of internal rate of return. So if you sort of do your business school studies, you may see something called IRR, or internal rate of return. You may also see it mentioned as like a hurdle rate or an internal hurdle. And what that basically means is the business, while you may have all sorts of great projects, if those projects are all returning 3% ROI in a year, or 4% ROI, or 2% ROI, the business could very easily say, well, there's an alternative. If I'm being the best steward of the company's money for our shareholders, if I could put 5%, if I could just take our money and put it in the bank and make 5%, if none of you are coming to me with projects that are any better than the rate I could get just putting it in the bank, which is absolutely no risk, aside from inflation, none of those are interesting projects to us. And so they oftentimes have what they call a hurdle rate or an internal rate of return, which is oftentimes going to be 2x or 3x the sort of what's considered the no risk rate. So again, you might go out and look at the banks here in June of 2023 and say, I can put money in a savings account and it earns 5%. So your company might internally say, look, I'm not looking at any projects that, because projects have risk, right? They might not work out, that are less than, say, 10%, 2x that hurdle rate, or 2x that no risk rate, or they could be 3x that no risk rate. Because again, you're wanting to be rewarded for taking the risk that the project might not work out. And so that's the sort of the third thing that they're looking for. So they were looking for positive ROI within a given time frame, and then a ROI that exceeds or meets or exceeds that internal rate of return or that hurdle rate, in which it's a good use of their money because the project has risk, right? You may fail at building the project. Your assumptions about the market might be wrong. The project might not be built in time. All sorts of things could happen. The market could change overnight. So that's typically the framework that you have for ROI, right? Should we invest in new salespeople? Should we invest in 10 new stores? Should we invest in a new fleet of trucks to deliver something, whatever it might be? And so typically with those kind of investments, people will look at that and they'll go, I can draw a pretty direct line between this investment and net new revenue, things that will make the investment positive, right? Now, this is where oftentimes with technology investments, things get a little trickier, right? So let's just take a really simple example. So you are a company and a company like Cisco comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, I haven't talked to you for a few years. We have the newest, fastest, awesomest networking equipment, and you should upgrade all of your existing equipment, right? So this is a very common technology discussion, right? So on some level you go, well, it's been 5 years since we bought new networking equipment. And, for the price that we used to pay for, let's call it gigabit Ethernet, it's now been 5 years. We can pay the same price for 10 gigabit Ethernet. So maybe I guess we should just go ahead and buy that. Or you may look at that and say, well, it's been 5 years. We're getting plenty of internet usage out of 1 gigabit Ethernet. Why do I need to do that? Right. And so there are plenty of technology projects, and didn't mean to pick on Cisco, but infrastructure is one of those ones that, maybe can be complicated where you go, well, what are we doing for the business? What net new revenue am I getting from making the network faster, or making storage faster, or making something more secure, right? That can feel like sometimes a difficult thing because as a technologist, you might be saying, well, we need to kind of keep up with the leading edge because, if our website is slow or our internal workers are always complaining that, when they're trying to work on projects, everything runs slow. It's hard to provision new storage, or the compute seems to take forever to build that new application, or whatever it might be. There's lots of arguments of like, well, we're not secure enough. or the environment is too slow, or it doesn't scale enough. But all those arguments, while they're fair technical arguments, if you roll that up to the finance people, they sort of go, well, fine, but I hear that all the time. Technologists are always complaining about technology. Show me how you're going to help us make more money, because I know you're going to ask me for new money. You're going to ask me for money that will become an expense of the business. How will this make new money? And this is oftentimes where building a technology ROI is more difficult. And I know we're now 10 minutes into this and you're going to get to the point. Let me get to the point. Building a technology ROI, you're typically trying to address one of three areas. Number one, can you directly prove that this investment you want to make is going to help the company generate new revenue? And there might be plenty of reasons why that's going to be the case. We need to invest in these 5 developers. They're going to focus on our mobile application. Our mobile application is going to allow us to, let's take the scenario of, fast food during the pandemic. Oh, well, people can't come in the stores. They need to use the mobile application. That's going to allow us to get more customers to come through, the store, the drive-through. That will generate revenue that we couldn't have generated because people would have been backed up in the drive-through, right? You can make a scenario like that. So in that case, it might not be that hard to say, well, if we, hire these 5 developers or buy this technology, we can draw a pretty direct line to making more revenue. Cool, right? That's the first thing. Can we make more revenue? And then you can go through the process that I explained before. The second thing that often happens with technology justification is, well, it's not really in our purview as to how we'll make more revenue, but this new technology has come along that will help reduce our costs. And those costs could be, it could be our cost of customer support. It could be our cost of just running IT. So for example, if you were VMware during the early 2000s or all of the 2000s, your argument was you have over-provisioned your compute. You are far underutilizing it. Maybe you have 100 servers today. You could get down to 10 servers. You could get rid of a lot of equipment. That equipment you won't have to keep purchasing over and over again. So their case study, their cost justification was you are going to reduce a whole bunch of cost out of your IT. And therefore, if you're reducing cost to the business, your ability to become more profitable is beneficial. So you may keep the exact same amount of revenue, but if your costs are 1/5 of where they were before, the amount of profit that you make goes up, right? So the second case is I need to prove to you that you're going to spend less money in the future, right? The third sort of argument or area in which you typically try to address this is we can reduce our risk, right? And that risk could be the risk of failure. So we need higher availability of our system, because if it fails, an outage for a bank is, $50 million per minute, or an airline is, $10 million per minute or whatever, right? So this is why you see these reports come out all the time. What is an outage cost a bank? What is a technical breach cost a insurance company or an airline or something large, right? Because that oftentimes is the justification. So your risk could be risk of availability, risk of security breach, risk of non-compliance, risk of, it could be a lot of things, right? Could be, you could make an argument that, well, this is an architectural decision. And so if we make this architectural decision, we don't run the risk of becoming, technically obsolete, right? Our competition has moved forward to this new paradigm of whatever it might be. We don't want to risk becoming technically obsolete or having too much technical debt in order to be able to compete in our marketplace, right? So risk can be a big bucket in terms of what it potentially is. But anyways, so you have these couple of frameworks that are going on, right? You have this sort of standard ROI model that I talked about, which is oftentimes tied to create more revenue. And then you have the ROI models, which are tougher to build of, well, we're going to save money, therefore we're going to be more profitable, or we're going to save money, therefore we can do more work with the same amount of budget you've given us before, right? So you've heard that argument before of, well, we're not asking for less budget. We're just going to be able to use it more cost effectively. We're going to make our developers more productive. We're going to automate a whole bunch of things that used to be manual. Therefore, we're going to free up people to stop working on non-differentiated heavy lifting. We're now going to work on more, proactive business things, good things for the business. But that's where it sort of falls into. And so what you get into in building an ROI model is, in the simplest sense, you are trying to build a before and after model. What does your world look like today, right? What are as many factors as you can consider in terms of what does today look like? And that's your before model. So that's going to be, the cost of technology, the cost of people, the cost of process, the cost of, inefficiencies, whatever they might be. You're trying to build as broad and as visible a before model as possible. And then you're building an after model. So if we move to this new technology or this new way of doing technology, maybe we're going to do the DevOps, we're going to do platform engineering, we're going to do self-service, we're going to do infrastructure as code, we're going to introduce ChatGPT into these things that we're doing. You're then trying to build an after model. And again, the same way that you try to include as many things possible that could be part of the cost or the implementation or the process of before, you're trying to consider those in the after realm, right? So the most common things that you often see from people are this technology is more efficient than the old technology. So maybe it's just purely the cost of a license is less, right? Oh, we're closer to being open source and free versus expensive and proprietary. Okay, that's very common. Could be you will need less people to do this. So today you have 10 people, you could reduce that down to 5 people. Or it could be, well, you have 10 people and they're all paid like rock stars because you have decided to build your own system. It's bespoke. If you buy this more packaged type of thing, you may not need as many people, but you also may not need the high level skill people, right? So maybe you can get them at half the cost or whatever it might be. So oftentimes you try and attack the cost of people or the cost of training or the cost of salary. Do you have to have the best of the best to do that? And then you begin to look at, things like, well, what would change, right? Maybe in the past with old technology, you needed 10 steps in order to be able to accomplish something that was really important to the business. Maybe we can now reduce that down to 2 steps. Okay, now we're measuring time, right? So, well, if, that is going to reduce 40% of the developer's work, maybe I still need those 10 developers because we're always backlogged, but, 60% of that cost that you used to allocate to those 10 developers is now allocated to the after. And the other 40% are sort of free to be allocated to new stuff, right? So this is where, a technology ROI isn't necessarily the same as doing a financial ROI, right? I put a bunch of links in there in the show notes for how do you do basic financial ROIs. Technical ROIs, again, they really boil down to building a before picture and an after picture. And then trying to either be as aggressive about what's going to change from one state, the before state to the after state, or being conservative or building kind of ranges. Oh, here's a conservative range of how much would change. Here's an aggressive range of how much would change. And sometimes you have to build multiple ROI models. Here's the conservative ROI model. Here's the middle average ROI model. Here's the aggressive one. Because oftentimes your CFO or person in charge of the money will come back and they'll go, well, I looked at the numbers and your math looks correct, but what's the true amount of risk here? What are we talking about? How confident are you that you're going to make these numbers, right? Is this a Hail Mary? Is this, hey, we could fall down every day and we would make this, we know hardly have to do anything. Or is it somewhere in between, right? And so you may end up having to build multiple models, again, having sort of a conservative estimate of changes, a mid-range of changes, and a kind of a wild hair, amount of changes and so forth. Now, all that stuff goes on. You build it, you try and make a justification for it. Oftentimes, if a vendor's involved or a systems integrator involved, they may try and help you, and they're going to include a bunch of things. And again, they might try and accelerate certain things. Now, where it also starts to get interesting is, well, how long, should I measure a technology ROI in the same way that I do a financial ROI, where you go, well, we only look at this on a 1-year basis or a 2-year basis. Technology might be open-ended, right? Well, are we going to pay for Java licenses, right? Let's say, for example, you're a Java shop and you go, oh, well, we're concerned about what it is. Well, we're not going to get rid of Java anytime soon. So how long should I make this model out for? Maybe we're going to decide to work with Red Hat or Oracle or AWS and, buy a support license for Java, just as an example. We don't plan to get rid of Java in our shop anytime soon. So do I build this as a 3-year model, a 5-year model, a 10-year model, right? Could be lots of variables in there as well. Now, the other two things that will come into play quite a bit, and this is where it's helpful to partner with some people that are on the finance side of things, or at least consult with them, because there's a couple of things that are involved. Number one, and this isn't the finance people so much, is you're building a business case, and the people that are, think of it as you're building a business case or an ROI case for a long period of time, a view of the future. But there's a very good possibility the people that are making the yes or no decision as to whether or not you cleared their hurdle rate or you were the right priority or whatever may not be here in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And so, you want to make the best case that you can. I'm not telling you to fudge the numbers or anything along those lines, but it's not unusual to see lots of projects that are a year in, 2 years, 3 years in, that you go, why did we do these? And who signed off on this? Well, it was so-and-so. He was here before. Or the guy before you did this. Or I inherited this project. That person's not here anymore. I'm not really sure why we got started. So, keep in mind that, technology projects tend to go on for a long time. And we also know that technology people tend to change roles or move around more frequently maybe than in some other roles. And so, there's a very good chance that the people that make the decision may not be around, or the people that have to implement it may not necessarily be around or be the same people. Now, last piece I'll sort of throw out there around this. And this is relevant from a cloud or software or investment perspective. It's really important. We talk a lot about, how great it is that there's now OPEX around buying for technology. You can just buy SaaS and you get billed by the month, and that's great because it can align to what your usage is, and you can get really granular about stuff and all sorts of things along those lines about why this is great. And maybe you're not locked into long-term contracts and so forth. Well, part of the reason why procurement groups and financial groups, finance groups liked long-term contracts was not because they loved, long-term contracts. In some cases they did. They liked the stability of being like, hey, we're going to have something that we can hold over the vendor for long periods of time. But the other part was you'll start to understand, and this kind of goes to, the MBA or business school side of things. It's important to understand the difference between a capital expense, something that is deemed to be an asset of the business that you can then depreciate over a period of time, versus OPEX, or an operating expense, which is deemed to be sort of a near-term running expense of doing a distinct thing. So, for example, if you build a building, you tend to label that building as an asset and something that you depreciate over time. Now, I don't want to go into sort of all the finance jargon about, what does all that mean, but in the simplest sense, depreciation means you have an asset. So think of it as like a building or a car or something, or a laptop or something. And what the business can do is they can go, well, I had to spend all the money up front to get that thing, but we're going to finance it over some period of time. And so I can write off or I can expense it over some period of time. And the reason they want to be able to do that is, in theory, you want to try and align your expenses with the cost of usage of whatever that thing is, right? So if you have a building, maybe you say, well, I think the relative useful life of the building is 40 years, or a car might be 5 years or something. And so you might want to use the expense of it over 5 years, right? You just divide it by 5. Now, but the other thing is there are rules about how CAPEX expensing and depreciation work that can be advantageous for the business. And this is where, again, it's helpful to talk to the business because this might help make or break your ROI model. Because depending on what their guidelines are internally, they may want you to be more OPEX centric, or they may want you to be more CAPEX centric, depending on, again, how long you think the project is going to go on for, how quickly they think you're going to be able to see a return on it. So maybe, you expect to get revenue back within 6 months. In other cases, this might be a 3-year project before revenue starts coming in. And they're going to want to both align to when revenue starts coming in, but also there are times when they can take advantage of how depreciation works to better help the business in terms of like taxation and so forth. And that's a whole nother conversation. I can put some links in the show notes as to what that is. But the reason I mention it is if you're doing an ROI study for something that's, more than a year, for example, you think it's going to take longer than that to potentially return value back to the business, definitely be engaged with the finance groups to figure out, like, do you prefer this to be CAPEX or OPEX? Do we have rules internally as to how this has to work? Because trust me, from having done these a number of times, that one factor can make or break whether or not you're going to get a positive ROI in the right time frame that you're looking to align to what the goals of the business is from a finance perspective. So anyways, I'm going to wrap up. Bottom line, technology ROIs more complicated than sort of finance, pure investment ROIs, because technology isn't always direct line to brand new revenue. It can often be direct line to cost reduction. It could take longer than normal for the business. The business may just have a really hard time understanding, why are you asking me for $400,000 for a vector database? What does that mean? I don't understand it. So anyways, it's definitely something you should be looking into because you're probably going to be asked about it now that we don't live in the zero interest rate world. It's not necessarily simple. There are lots of examples out there. I put a few examples in the show notes. But if you've never done one before and you're beginning to get into a role in which you are making more decisions, or you're evaluating vendors, or you're evaluating projects, or you're doing project management, or whatever it might be, you're more involved with sort of the intersection of not only how the technology works, but how you're going to pay for it. It would be well worth your time to dig in a little bit as to how do I do an ROI model? Because you may have very well gotten away from having to do one for the last 5 to 10 years. Again, the financial markets were different. I suspect you will now probably be asked to do one somewhere in the next 6 to 12 months as, again, businesses have maybe less money to spend. They're tighter about how they want to spend the money. They've got more restrictions or more guidelines about how to do it. And ROI is something that you will be asked for at some point in time. So hopefully this was helpful. I know it would have been easier if I had just done like one really specific, here's exactly how you build that. Every one of them are a little bit different. If anybody has any questions, I've done a bunch of these, feel free to ask. Happy to help. So hope that was useful. Enjoy kind of sometimes just doing educational shows here on the Sunday Perspective Show. Thanks to everybody for listening. I'm glad you've all been here for June. We've got a lot of interesting shows coming up in June and July, and beginning to even look at August shows. So Aaron and I are digging into that, trying to get a lot of stuff planned out because summertime comes along, people go on vacations and all sorts of stuff. So anyways, thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us continue to grow the show. I think we are, again, still up, 10, 12, 14% for the year, which just means you folks are helping us grow the show. You find value in it, and we're glad to provide that for you. So anyways, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.